Great. Thank you for that introduction, Lena, and for the great voices from our community-based protection groups themselves, which is very important for our work and for you all to see. So on the next slide about risks of SGBV, I'll just highlight briefly, part of our community-based protection work includes the prevention of and response to sexual and gender-based violence. So the community-based protection groups alerted UNHCR to an increase in SGBV or sexual and gender-based violence during the outbreak of COVID 2019. And also, alerted us to some related prevention measures by the National Provincial Authority to sexual and gender-based violence. I'm hearing myself echo, but they're often the first point of contact for community members before even medical structures or police. So for example, if someone is a survivor of an incident of gender-based violence, they often go straight to one of the community-based protection groups supported by UNHCR. And the members of that community-based protection group include community members as well as IDPs will then refer that individual to the appropriate services. So whether that be to the closest medical center, or if they need, psychosocial support, things like that, to the relevant structure. So community-based protection structures are a super important source of information for UNHCR to evaluate trends in SGBV risk during the COVID-19 outbreak, when we're not as readily able to go to the field and otherwise. The biggest factor cited as an increase of risk for incidents of SGBV is the loss of income for families, and especially women who work in the informal sector with less job and income security. So some of the things that we've seen, with our increased communication with community-based groups during COVID-19, is an increase in child marriage and pregnancy amongst minors. This we have linked to girls not going to school, as schools were closed from March to September 2020. Parents not having the money that they did before COVID-19 to support their children as easily. An increase in sexual abuse and rape in general. For example, a frequent occurrence of this is when women are searching for firewood or going to the market or other fields that are a bit far from their home. We've seen survival sex, which is when women use sex to earn money as a means to survive. For example, to be able to afford products for feminine needs, like dignity kits. So these are just a couple of examples of the way that COVID-19 has affected women and girls proportionally. And also the pieces of information that we've learned through our communication lines with the community-based structures. So on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about stigmatization of IDPs in Eastern DRC. So why would IDPs be stigmatized? In general, this is because, well, it is a perception and also sometimes a reality that IDPs receive aid when some communities who are also in need do not. So for example, UNHCR may do a distribution for IDPs, but the community in the village next door will not have received this distribution, even though we do always try to include host community members. But that is the perception. We have also seen stigmatization against IDPs who are in actual physical sites. So as Lena mentioned earlier, most of the IDPs in Eastern DRC are housed in host community villages, whether in host families or just on their own in these villages. So it's quite rare that you'll see IDPs in Eastern DRC in actual sites. So we see those that are in sites in the province of North Kivu being stigmatized. and this stigmatization was increased by COVID-19. So as I mentioned, for the most part, most IDPs in Eastern DRC do not experience significant stigma because of the cyclical nature of displacement in Eastern DRC. Many of the folks who have been displaced, have at once been host community members and vice versa. So many of those host community members have once been displaced. So there's, a level of understanding amongst these IDPs and their host communities. But there is stigma in certain cases, as I mentioned, such as the IDPs in sites in North Kivu. So, this could always change. The level of stigma could always change. And we've seen that COVID-19 could be a factor of increasing stigma towards IDPs. For example, if there were to be, COVID cases in an area where there are IDPs, we could see increased stigma towards them as a means of kind of scapegoating. So the information sharing that community-based protection groups is doing is really crucial to continue to prevent stigmatization of IDPs. So on the next slide, we see that from our experience working on our community-based protection project and being in the field in Eastern DRC, the services provided by community-based protection groups reduce stigmatization of not only IDPs in general, but of all survivors of various protection incidents, whether that be children who are subjected to protection risks like joining armed groups or forced child labor, or women who have been women or boys who have been subjected to sexual and gender-based violence. So a statement of conclusion is that IDPs are a positive force for change. So together with their host community members, IDPs are given the tools to advocate with and for local authorities to ensure that IDPs have equal accesses to services and protection in their host areas. So the results that they achieve really benefit the entire community. So this is especially important for those IDPs living in sites in North Kivu, where they're proportionally more stigmatized. Some examples of this advocacy that benefits the entire community is that throughout Eastern DRC, community-based groups have been advocating to their health zone officials for more COVID-19 prevention measures and materials, which, of course, benefits the entire community in ensuring their health and safety. And they have also advocated to restrict mining companies from using child labor during this period of COVID-19, where children are more likely to try to find work in the mines because the schools are closed. So those are just some of the examples of the positive results of advocacy of these community-based groups. So community members and IDPs work together to share information on COVID-19 prevention measures. And lastly, humanitarian actors are not the face of the information sharing that the community-based groups are doing, nor for the advocacy. So this further reduces the risk that any stigma that there may be towards humanitarian actors is not transferred to IDPs. So community-based protection in Eastern DRC, what have we learned? We've learned what communities really want. So community-based groups provided very clear recommendations for how UNHCR can help them address protection and other concerns in their communities. We've learned that information prevents stigmatization. So IDPs contribute to communities by sharing information and advocacy. And lastly, we need to continue to approach the communities to better understand their wants and needs as the context of COVID-19 evolves and beyond that. So finally, community-based protection groups continue to play a leading role in their own lives and protection. And we as humanitarian actors are extremely grateful to them for all of the work that they do and all of the information that they provide us. So on the next slide, that's our closure and thank you slide. We thank you all for taking the time to listen to our presentation, to hear the voices of community-based protection groups that we work with. And we are now available to answer any questions. We're really looking forward to engaging with you all and having an active dialogue. So thank you again, and thank you, Lena, and to DW.
Well, I guess we should be saying thank you for taking this time to really explain exactly what the UNHCR is doing together with these communities. Thanks a lot, Lena and your team for sharing your time with us. I think one key thing I take from this is the importance of these community-based groups, because when people sense that their own local community are involved in making moves to help deal with the situations and the conditions that they are in, then they feel more comfortable to connect. And I think that is very key. I have a couple of questions in relation to that and how the UNHCR team is also really liaising amidst all of these challenges that still members of the community are facing. But we'll get to that during the Q&A. Wanjiku?
Yeah, it was quite interesting to listen to your presentation and to watch these videos, because something that stuck for me was that 88% of IDPs are settled within local communities or families. And if that isn't a sign that something is working and working positively, I don't know what is. So it was absolutely amazing to listen to you, Lena and Rebecca, and every other person that was in the video. Now, as we promised before, we are checking our conference up for your questions.
Well, talking about questions, picking up from Wanjiku's last words, hopefully we have time, Wanjiku and myself, to dig into some of them. But the first question was posted by Luvini Ranasingwe, who says, how do you use feedback mechanisms? When you hear back from the communities, how do you make sure their voices are really listened to and the communities don't feel frustrated of only just answering questions, but the programs also change accordingly? So that's quite a loaded pack of questions. Lena or anyone can jump on this.
If it's okay with you, Lena, I think I'll start off, and you can definitely chime in for, I'm sure won't give the 100% answer, but yeah, so the beautiful thing about our community-based protection program is that it's kind of flexible and ever changing. And as I hope was clear from our presentation, we really base it off of the community-based protection groups. So, if the community-based protection groups articulate that, this is working or this is not working, then we alter our programs. And, of course, we're a bit constrained from a year to year basis, but at least, every year we completely reevaluate and rewrite the project. So for example, between 2019 and 2020, these community-based groups and through the complaints or response mechanisms, they expressed that there's really a strong need for more response for survivors of SGBV in certain locations where support wasn't available. So we integrated that into our program for 2020. So we, as UNHCR, really rely heavily on these, complaints and other the opinions of the communities. And, we try, if it's possible, to change it during the year of the same project. We, try as best as we can. But definitely the next year, we, rework the project to best serve the communities. Another example is in the community-based protection plans and the quick impact projects that Lena explained. Those are completely driven by the community-based structure. So it's for them to say, this is the problem that we're seeing a lot in our community. This is what we need, and this is what we're asking you for money and materials for, basically. So we really are taking their lead. So yeah, that's all I can say. I'll let Lena add anything if she'd like to.
No, thank you. No, I think you responded quite well to it and explained how it worked. And exactly as you said, I think with many of our projects, we already try to include the communities from the beginning, which then also helps to prevent complaints. Of course, there's always complaints, obviously, but by engaging from the beginning and making sure that they're already involved in the design of projects, this helps us prevent getting many complaints afterwards about how this has not, our interventions have not been effective or haven't responded to needs that we're seeing. So even, for example, we work with community-based protection groups also, for example, to identify persons that we're assisting, to make sure that it's persons that are proposed by the whole community and that the whole community stands behind the type of assistance that we deliver. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your answer. Luvini, I do hope that you feel the answer was satisfactory for you. And in case not, remember, you can always interact with Lena and Rebecca through our app, okay? So do not be discouraged. And now we get into another question, which asks, how exactly does UNHCR cooperate with radio stations in the context of protection work in Eastern DRC?
Shall I go for it first? So I think we've got to be clear about what we're saying here. On the one hand, we see that community-based protection groups work directly with radio stations. So this is something where the groups directly approach the radio station. They will set up a program together, for example. So, members, experts of the groups, they're coming to the radio station. They, for example, they do Q&As. That's a format that we've seen, so that members from the community can call into the radio station, ask their questions. We also have, there's also the formats of sessions that that the community-based groups are leading. So they're having sort of an expert dialogue where they're passing on information through to the community. There's also other formats where they're just airing small spots, so just like a 10 to 20-second message about please wash your hands regularly, or please, if you have this or that issue, you can always come to us. We're available here. You can find us there. So this is a way that we see that community-based groups themselves take the initiative. How we as UNHCR are working together with radio stations is in a similar way, actually. So we also currently we're working, for example, on producing messages about raising awareness on SGBV, how to prevent SGBV, what the rights of survivors of SGBV are, and then we just choose radio stations, we pass them on a message that we've already recorded and that they can then play throughout the day to pass on that information to community members. I'll let Rebecca add maybe, because I know that for refugees, which is a different context than IDPs, but I think for refugees, we also have radio stations that we have started together with them. I'm not sure if Rebecca maybe can tell you a bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you, Lena, and thank you for this question. I just wanted to add back to our community-based protection program for IDPs that we mentioned we have these kind of quick impact projects with the IDP or the community-based protection groups. And one of those in South Kivu was actually creating a community radio. So that was what they requested as their project. So they, that was their initiative. That was what they thought would respond to the most pertinent protection needs in their area. So that was what we supported in 2019. So that, radio is ongoing. So that was a really cool example of using radio. Yeah, as Lena said, for the refugees, there have been refugee radio stations set up, not directly by UNHCR, but by other humanitarian actors. But we, in general, use the radio and community radio specifically as a tool to communicate with refugees, for example, around COVID-19 prevention measures, when there's something like World Refugee Day or World Humanitarian Day, things like that. We use the radio as a tool to kind of get our message across and, remind the individuals that we support, like that UNHCR is here, like here are your rights, here are, here's assistance that we're hoping to provide, in support of the DRC government. So yeah, it's a really big tool for us.
Okay, now for those of you still tuned in, you still have the chance to ask any question on your mind, because our presenters are here to answer anything. Talking about questions still, I have a couple of them. I'll start with this one. So you mentioned, and I'm not in any way trying to belittle people internally displaced, but trying to put myself into their shoes. They are facing so many different challenges. You know, you're internally displaced. You're already thinking about a lot. Then there's also a pandemic that you have to deal with. You have to think about what you're even eating every day and your family and all your loved ones. How does the UNHCR decide the best way to approach dealing with such people, especially during the pandemic? What is the priority? What helps you decide your next course of action?
I guess I can start, Lena, if that's okay. So I think, our presentation is kind of an answer to that question, in that we really rely on the community. So it's not for UNHCR to say like, oh, this is the biggest need. It's for the communities to tell us what they need or what their priorities are. So, of course, we think about essential services such as like medical assistance, food assistance, but, at times what I may think as an American living in DRC is not correct. So we really rely on, what the community-based groups are telling us. So for example, in one place where we might think that, and this is just not a real example. So for example, if we think, food is the biggest problem, they'll tell us actually, no, it's the fact that schools are closed and children don't have anything to do, and we're seeing cases of sexual and based violence against children. That's the biggest issue right now. So I guess, I can't give you a really concrete answer, except that we really rely on the community-based groups to tell us what they need and want. And that's kind of, during our presentation, there were some slides about different evaluations that we did with the community-based groups about their needs specifically during COVID-19. And the purpose there was to find out what they want UNHCR to be doing or not doing, what's working, what's not working, etc. So that's really how we try to work on our response to IDPs in their host community.
Okay, Lena, if you have any top up.
Yes, if I may, I fully agree with Rebecca's explanation. I just wanted to add, another very important aspect that plays into it is also managing expectations of communities, because, we as UNHCR, we can only do so much. So we're there to listen, to really understand and analyze the problem, but we also often refer to other actors. We have certain areas in which we as UNHCR can intervene, but for example, we're not medical experts for internally displaced persons. So this is something where, a lot of the times what we're also doing is to just check with other humanitarian actors saying, hey, we have seen that there is a need for this or that. The community tells us they want this or that. Can you, with your expertise and with your capacities, help in that regard? So it's not UNHCR doing it all on our own. And I think it's always very important to tell communities what is feasible, what is not feasible. And I think that's also links really back to communications and how communication is a two-way road. Like, yes, we're listening, and listening is super important, but we're also responding, and we sometimes it is better to be transparent and explain what cannot be done, why it cannot be done, what the difficulties are, rather than just make empty promises or not explain at all. So I think that's just a very important aspect as well that needs to be mentioned.
Okay.
I actually do have a follow-up question because Lena, you've finished on a very good point about transparency. And something that was mentioned during the presentation was that communities are not yet ready to deal with COVID-19 on their own. They do want you to step in as UNHCR to step in and help them. And as the presentation was going on, what I missed, and this is where the transparency on just a communication basis comes in, was I couldn't understand what, I can deduce why, but I couldn't understand the reason for the community to decide or to say, hey, we just want you to help us. Perhaps you can expound a bit more on that situation and how that also either adds to your challenges, the fact that they want you there, or helps your work in the community. Either of you could take the question.
Shall I start, and then I'll let Rebecca complete and add on to what I'm saying. So I think, first of all, we have to say, COVID-19 really is an exceptional situation. I think it's globally an exceptional situation, but it's also here in the DRC an exceptional situation. And it has added on to what we already consider a humanitarian emergency. So we've already seen that, over 1 million persons have been displaced in 2 provinces just this year alone. So that's like already in a very exceptional situation. So it can be very overwhelming for communities to be dealing with this. And whereas oftentimes protection, you can do a lot by raising awareness and sharing information, COVID-19 also poses a lot of material needs to which communities with their limited facilities often just cannot respond. We have to see, host communities are already incredibly generous in taking in IDPs and incredibly generous in sharing what often are already restricted resources. So oftentimes, access to clean water already is a challenge. Oftentimes host families live in food insecurity. So they're already sharing the little that they have with IDPs, but then responding to COVID-19 on top just can be very overwhelming. So for example, if access to water already is difficult, having even more access to water for hand washing as is necessary for COVID-19 can be a big challenge. Having access to soap is a challenge. Being able to afford masks, all those are things that are material needs that simply cost money, that require resources that communities often just don't have. And this is where they want us to step in. They also have limited access to information. So another important part was also that we are handing them reliable information before they then can pass on that reliable information on COVID-19 to their communities. And I think especially in the beginning of the crisis, this has really been a big challenge. Overall, I think for us, it's a positive sign that communities do request our assistance still at the moment. It's just always a balance of them not being dependent on us. But of course, we're here to give assistance. And I think that's the great thing about the community-based approach. We support, but they're not dependent on us, and we're not imposing. So I think that would be from my side. I hope this answered your question. I'll hand over to Rebecca for any additions.
Yes, you have answered my question,
Thank you for the question,
Rebecca.
and thank you, Lena. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I mean, Lena pretty much covered everything. I was just going to emphasize that, with COVID response, there's a lot of material needs. The health zones, they may in certain areas not necessarily have the equipment or the staffing necessary. So for example, in one case, we gave a donation of motorbikes to help COVID-19 contact tracing and referrals and things like that. So there are kind of very specific things that require resources that host communities that are already kind of strapped for resources and are affected by conflict are even more affected by when they're hosting large numbers of IDPs. So yeah, exactly what Lena said, just wanted to emphasize that.
Thank you so much for your responses, Eddie. I'm sure you would have more questions, as do I. However, our time is slowly coming to an end for today's session. Remember, this kind of sessions, insightful discussions will continue throughout the week. And we hope that everyone who's asked a question has been answered so far. Remember, you still have a chance to follow up on the conference app. But for now, let's take a look at tomorrow's program. We will have representatives of 2 community media with us, Kamji in Lebanon and Sikika in Kenya.
Well, both organizations shifted their strategies towards information related to COVID-19, and they will share their experience of helping refugees to navigate the pandemic. We'll be joined by the community reporters from Kakuma refugee camp and Shatila themselves and get first-hand experience from the field. So Wanjiku, you and myself and everybody tuned in, it's something you don't want to miss.
Definitely not. And I want to say a special thank you to Lena and Rebecca and each of the participants of today's session. Thank you so much for being with us. Now you know what you can expect from tomorrow. That's it from us. My name is Wanjiku Maura.
And I am Eddie Micah Jr. We'll be right here, same place, and of course the time remains the same. And yeah, for all that you need to know, I am Eddie Micah Jr. Goodbye.